I haven't tried yet, but I will. There we go. Yeah, so it should.
Okay, we'd like to call the meeting of the State Board of Higher Education to order. Christy, would you please take the roll?
Board Chair Diedrich.
Here.
Mr. Espegard. Dr. Johnstead.
Here.
Ms. Hoffer. Here. Mr. Hoffer.
Here.
Mr. Morton.
Here.
Mr. Munsky.
Dr. Munsky is present.
Ms. Nessett. Here. Ms. Reichert. Here. Mr. Schaff.
Shaft is here.
Dwayne.
Is Dwayne, are you online? No, okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, before we get started, just a technical issue, just to remind everybody, because this is only the second time we've had this, microphones, if the red light's on, you're being picked up, and this is all being live streamed. And if the red light's off, you're not being picked up, so that you're not saying something that's going over live stream. So just a reminder of that. And once again, I want to thank Bismarck State College. You can see all the equipment that's sitting in here. And by the way, during breaks, I recommend you go over and take a look at how they've got this thing set up. It's really, if you're a tech guy, you would really appreciate all the technology that goes into this. So, but at any rate, just the reminder.
Okay, thank you, Chancellor. First on the agenda, approval of January 30th, 2014 minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Christy?
Mr. Morton.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffer.
Yes.
Dr. Johnstead.
Yes.
Ms. Nessett.
Yes.
Ms. Reichert.
Yes.
Mr. Schaff.
Shaft votes yes.
Mr. Espegard. Board Chair Diedrich.
Diedrich votes yes. Okay. Item number 2, approval of the agenda. And before we do approve the agenda, I'm going to poll item 11, and the Chancellor will tell us the reason why.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a lot of spinning plates on this. First, it's the annual budget. It's not the biennial budget, so it's going forward in our current biennium. And there were some issues yesterday. You may have seen some criticism, and actually criticism against the board, and I apologize for that. It shouldn't be against the board until you take an action on the thing. It's staff work, and so we as a staff put the agenda together and then send it out. And until you take action on it, there should be no criticism of you. But nevertheless, there was some issues on there. We need to staff a little better on the tuition. There was some information taken out of context that actually had to do with fees and not tuition, but it was quoted as being part of the tuition discussion. So we need to clarify that. Also, I've been working very closely with NDSA on the Connect ND fee, and that was in there, and we have now come to a conclusion that we can, in fact, as the NDSA group has asked us, we can decrease that fee, so we're pulling that. That's being part of the budget, and so we're giving a lot of good news, Ms. Vetter, for the NDSA on being able to reduce that Connect ND fee. So that's the second reason. And then the third, and I think the most important reason, when I talked to the chair about the budget, is she wants this budget reviewed by the Budget and Finance Committee, which you're all going to approve today, the policy that reestablishes that committee. So in fairness, to get that back to the Budget and Finance Committee. So for all those reasons, I've recommended to the chair that item number 11 be pulled. Thank you,
All
Madam.
right, thank you very much. All right, moving on, it is the board chair's report. And I'd like to say welcome, and what an
Madam Chair,
Oh.
I'm sorry, to approve the
Oh.
agenda?
Oh, sorry. I'm just so excited to talk about Steve Shirley. I just can't wait.
I don't blame you.
All right. Motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Ms. Reichert? Yes. Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Schaff?
Schaff votes yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffer?
Yes.
Dr. Johnstead?
Yes.
Board Chair Diedrich?
Yes. Okay. Now I can talk about the exciting day at Minot State University. Today we appointed Dr. Stephen Shirley as the 9th president of Minot State. And I feel like I should say congratulations and welcome home. On another note, we have a very full agenda today, and some of the people in the room would like to get back for a Founders Day celebration in Grand Forks, so I'm going to keep my comments rather brief, but I do want to give you a couple of highlights. This month, Dr. Munsky, Don Morton, Dr. Chelmstead, and I attended the second of 4 joint boards meetings where we're working in a collaborative effort to move forward the idea of a P20 education system in North Dakota. This is very exciting. Our first meeting, we discussed the fact that we needed to meet more often to actually put some meat into this initiative, and it's been wonderful working with the other boards. I also, along with the Chancellor and System Office staff, attended the Higher Ed Funding Committee meeting hosted by North Dakota State College of Science, where we discussed the funding model and had the opportunity to share the many successes of our 2-year institutions. And I'd like to thank Dr. Richmond for hosting us at that event. And then yesterday, the Roles and Responsibilities Task Force met to review and discuss the responsibility matrix, the draft of the Roles and Responsibility Task Force report, and we also heard a presentation by past Chancellor Larry Isaac, where he gave us a historical perspective of the university system. I have to say, this is a great time to be in North Dakota, and we'll be sharing even more of our plans on how to bring the university system to the next level later in this meeting. So with that, that is the end of my report, and I'd like to move on to item 4, Dr. Scogan, the Chancellor's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, we began having presentations from the institutions on what we're calling institutional initiatives, and typically those have followed my report, but Dr. Denver Tolliver is who's going to be giving this report to you now on the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute of NDSU, and he's got to catch a plane. So we moved him to the very front, and so Dr. Tolliver, if you want to come and give your presentation, we'd appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Chancellor Scogan, for this invitation to address the board, and thank you for the time today. I'd like to talk, I realize you have a close agenda, but what I'd like to do is very quickly give you an overview of NDSU's Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute. The Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute, UGPTI for short, was established by the legislature in 1967 as a specialized research institute at North Dakota State University. The enabling legislation also created an advisory council, which I will talk a little bit more about in just a moment. The original intent was to establish an objective entity that would study the effects of transportation and transportation limitations on the state's economy and particularly on the marketing of goods and the capability of North Dakota producers to distribute our products in distant markets. And North Dakota being located far distances from the east and the west coast and the population centers, transportation cost and transportation efficiency were major concerns. So much of our early work kind of focused on access to markets, and particularly railroad access to markets, Chicago and some of the major grain markets, but also the East and the West Coast. And that's still one of our primary focus areas, and particularly with respect to oil and grain, some of our other products. But we also have evolved into a comprehensive research center that focuses on all modes of transportation, but especially on surface transportation. And we originally started out basically looking at marketing and economics, but we have very much of a multidisciplinary staff now. We have civil engineers, industrial engineers, supply chain specialists, policy specialists. So we really cover all modes and all facets of transportation. Our main offices are located on the Fargo campus, but we also have an office here in Bismarck, and we have an office in Lakewood, Colorado, which specializes in motor carrier safety analysis. We are also the lead institution in an organization called the Mountain Plains Consortium, which includes 8 universities in our region, 3 in the state of Colorado, 2 in the state of Utah, Wyoming, and South Dakota. We are the lead university, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Mountain Plains Consortium later. This is a list of our advisory council members. We usually meet 2-3 times a year. The role of the council is to provide us with broad guidance and support. We had an extended session in October, a strategic planning session, and we engaged our council members, and they identified what they thought were the 5 or 6 most critically important emerging issues that we could focus on more and develop into the future. The chair of our committee right now is from the Association of General Contractors in North Dakota, Russ Hansen. I spoke earlier about the Mountain Plains Consortium. We're one of the competitively selected university transportation centers. There are 10 federal regions, and we are the center for Federal Region 8. In addition to NDSU, which leads the consortium, we have 3 universities in Colorado, 2 in Utah, University of Wyoming, South Dakota State University. Our primary focus is on transportation infrastructure and safety, although we do conduct a lot of research on intermodal freight transportation. A couple of the universities in the consortium, particularly University of Denver and University of Colorado Denver, focus on metropolitan planning and traffic analysis. So we think it's a very balanced consortium and a very good partnership that covers the entire region. In fact, USDOT has commented several times that they think we have the best consortium in the nation because we blend our strengths together and we bring a lot more to the table, so the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts. We also engage in technology transfer and extensive workforce development. Perhaps our best-known research efforts in North Dakota relate to road and bridge infrastructure, and we are in our 3rd study for the governor and the North Dakota legislature. And what we do is we forecast truck traffic across the state for the next 20 to 25 years on a year-by-year basis. And we do very detailed modeling of the oil industry and agricultural-related transportation and logistics. We model the predicted trips down at the individual spacing unit for oil and at the township level for crop production. And once we estimate all of these trips each year, then we assign them to the highway system and we estimate the truck trips and axle loads on individual road segments. And this is the primary source of information that the legislature uses to estimate funding needs for county and township roads. And so for the last 2 sessions, the legislature has appropriated incremental funds. We're reporting to 2 interim committees, and we'll have our final study done in June, and we're scheduled on the July 8th agenda for the Energy Development and Transmission Committee. That time we'll be presenting our final results, and we'll also be briefing the governor's chief of staff that same week. And so once we estimate all this traffic, we project how much funding is needed by biennium for the 25-year period. And this is a major improvement over traditional methods What we used to do 15, 20 years ago was we would count the traffic on a road 3, 4, 5 years, and then we would trend that into the future. That doesn't tell you anything about what's happening in western North Dakota. That trend line means nothing, and not only does it mean nothing now, it may change completely based on drilling activities and all sorts of other changes in the technology. We also developed the traffic models that the North Dakota DOT uses to predict the traffic flows over their highways, and we also provide them with a detailed analysis of all investment needs for all state highways for the 20-year period, and they use this to in testimony before the legislature to estimate the state funding needs. And we also do a lot of technical assistance for counties and townships. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I don't want you to think that we just focus on highways, because we also look at railroad transportation. As I'll talk about a little bit later, we have a freight transportation program. We have a traffic analysis center on campus in Fargo, and we provide technical and planning assistance to small and medium-sized cities, particularly to the MPOs in North Dakota, and also to the North Dakota DOT, which needs to plan their highways in urban areas. We have some pretty sophisticated models here. We have most of the traffic simulation models that are used by Federal Highway Administration and most of the state DOTs. We do the travel demand modeling for the MPOs to help them predict their traffic, again, year by year, 20 years into the future. We help them implement intelligent transportation systems solutions to reduce congestion and improve safety. And we also collect a lot of data ourselves. And in 2013, we actually collected traffic at about 1,100 locations around the state, mostly on county and township roads. So we have a really good idea of what the traffic pattern is out there. And we make this information available to counties and to anyone else who wants to use it. And in fact, I think I interact with a lot of other folks from universities around the state through committees. I think we got the best county and township database in the United States for, at least for rural roads. Our original focus was agricultural and freight transportation, and we still focus highly on that. A lot of it is economic analysis of railroad, truck, and intermodal transportation options. And particularly we look at the service levels, the markets, industry practices, what are the costs of moving goods from North Dakota to other areas of the country by different types of car and different shipment levels. And then we also provide shippers with information that is useful for their logistics planning. The North Dakota DOT is going to be undertaking a freight planning process. In fact, they're far into it right now, and we're going to be helping them and providing them with technical assistance along the way. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we have strongly developed our technology application and deployment dimension of UGPTI. And originally we focused on RFID and applications of RFID in locating rail cars and vehicles and in inventory management, but we've moved more into looking at advancements in low power sensors combined with wireless communications and mobile computing to provide almost real-time information about not only shipments but traffic patterns, conditions of pavements, structures, etc. And one of the examples is that we spend a lot of time collecting pavement roughness information, something called the International Roughness Index, where we drive a vehicle all over the roads. That's very time-consuming and labor-intensive. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're instrumenting vehicles with sensors and accelerometers. And when the vehicles drive over the pavement, we measure the roughness instantaneously, and we have smartphone applications then that will transmit that back, and we can capture the data immediately. The road conditions are changing very rapidly in western North Dakota, and we think this has a lot of potential, a lot of application, and hopefully 5 years from now we'll be seeing this all over the road, all over the state, where state vehicles and even industry vehicles are such equipped. We have a specialized center for the North Dakota Department of Transportation on campus. And sometimes what the North Dakota DOT wants is they want some very quick, fast studies. They have a major problem they didn't understand. and so they need something in 3, 4, 5 months, and so we provide this quick response research capability to them, primarily in highway engineering and planning. We also have a student roadway design section, so we'll recruit on campus and probably have maybe 8 to 10 junior, senior civil engineering students working under the direction of 2 North Dakota DOT employees who are stationed on campus with us. And they actually do design projects for the DOT in their junior and senior years. And the DOT uses the projects. The students get great real-life experience, and the North Dakota DOT gets to meet them. They get to understand the organization, so it's really a win-win situation. We also have the local technical assistance program, and that's operated out of our Bismarck office here. And it's part of a nationwide network that focuses on the exchange of information on transportation technology, particularly among local units of government, county, township, and small cities. Through the LTAP, we provide a lot of training and technical assistance, and 3 years ago, we added a special program for Western North Dakota. And we have people that go around the counties and visit with the county engineers and the road managers and give them technical assistance, particularly those that are heavily impacted by oil-related traffic. And we also have a Transportation Learning Network office, which is also headquartered here in Bismarck. This is a workforce training initiative. And in addition to the 8 universities that I mentioned earlier, we have 4 state transportation departments that are partners in this transportation learning network. And so we develop training, sometimes professional certification, but it could be training, professional development for engineers. And we provide access to that through a wide range of media. I mean, we can do video conferences, but that's really not the norm. We have regular webinars. We have an entire series of online modules. And what the DOTs use this for is they'll hire somebody with maybe an associate degree, doesn't have really background in transportation. We very quickly go through like almost a year sequence of technical trainings on some of the fundamental concepts that they're going to need. And I think we have a pretty unique learning management system because the employees, the DOT employees, can log into the system, and the system tracks them, it sets their training goals, and then it monitors progress towards those training goals by virtue of the modules that they have taken. Most people don't realize this, but we write and develop and maintain almost all of the software that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration uses. And all of the inspectors in the North Dakota Highway Patrol and most of the highway patrols around the United States actually use this software when they stop vehicles and inspect them in the field for safety, whether it be at port of entry, at weigh stations, or actually anywhere. We also write a lot of the software that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration use when they go visit the motor carrier company itself. And so if a motor carrier company has a record of out-of-service violations, then their inspectors will go on site. And we have about 5, 6 specialized pieces of software that they use when they're out there. And we're very interested then in safety-related search that will improve the targeting of motor carrier safety enforcement, and that is isolate on those companies and isolate on those drivers and those vehicles in those areas where there are problems. And one of the things we're looking at is wireless roadside inspection, where we capture all the information that's generated by the truck that's coming in, not just in the not just in the tractor itself, but sometimes the trailers has sensor information on braking system, tire pressure, all of that stuff. We can capture that, send it to a wayside location, and then those vehicles and those companies that are compliant, they just go on by. We don't stop them. We don't impede the commerce. That's still a couple of years away, but we're working on it. We also have a transit center that specializes in small and urban rural transit, and some of the example studies that we've done are coordination of transit systems in the state, applications of ITS to transit systems, and mobility planning. We also collaborate with the North Dakota DOT and the Federal Highway Administration on a wide variety of safety and security research, and we have recently established a Transportation Safety Advisory Committee That includes the director of the North Dakota DOT, the superintendent of the North Dakota Highway Patrol, the director of the North Dakota Department of Emergency Services, and the division directors for Federal Motor Carrier Safety, Federal Railroad Administration, Federal Highway Administration, and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And we'll be developing a 2-year plan, a program of research, education, outreach, and technical assistance. And in fact, Chancellor Scogan, the reason I have to leave quickly is I'm making a presentation to the Safety Council of the U.S. DOT in Washington, D.C. tomorrow morning. Very concerned about transportation safety in North Dakota, particularly related to movement of crude oil and energy-related activity in the Bakken. So we will be continuing with a lot of activities. We also coordinate NDSU's multidisciplinary education programs through the Transportation and Logistics program. We offer a PhD. We also offer the Master of Managerial Logistics degree, and we're going completely online with this degree through a cooperative agreement with Army Logistics University at Fort Lee. And Army Logistics University views us as the premier logistics program for military logisticians in the United States. They invited us to offer the program on Fort Lee. That wasn't practical, but we're going online, and so wherever the soldiers are around the world, active duty, military, reservist, they can take our program, take it online, and we're very, very excited about this, and we're looking forward to hopefully growing that into the premier program in the United States. We also have an online Masters of Transportation Urban Systems and a Transportation Leadership Graduate Certificate program. And I realize I'm going over time, so I'm going to quickly move through here. We have a long-term commitment to tribal transportation planning and outreach, and we partner with North Dakota DOT and the tribal technical assistance programs, as well as some of the tribes. And we're making a big a push on not only roadway management but tribal transportation safety, and we're going to be putting some substantial resources into that. Very quickly, some emerging areas. We do work for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. When they look at making a waterway investment, for example, replacing a lock in the upper Mississippi River system, we model the effects of them not making that investment, which means it goes by rail or it goes by truck or something. And then we also maintain most of their models, including their barge cost model. We have a great collaboration with the Aerospace Center of UND, and we put in quite a few collaborative proposals together, and we're bringing the air services planning capabilities to this partnership, and we're also very interested in partnering with them on potential UAS applications. And Chancellor Scogan, thank you so much for the invitation. I realize I've gone over time, and so with that I will stop.
Thank you, Dr. Tolliver. I found this presentation absolutely fascinating when he gave it. So often, and when we talk about higher education, we think about undergraduate education, you know, English 110 and college algebra and those sorts of things. And to have this presentation from Dr. Tolliver that talks about not only the logistics and transportation in the state of North Dakota, but nationally, to know that NDSU is in Lakewood, Colorado, helping national safety transportation efforts was just fascinating to me, and I thought you would all find it equally fascinating. I don't know if anybody has any questions at all.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and safe travels.
Thanks.
My second initiative to talk about, and
Thank you, Dwayne. We've got you down.
Secondly, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, I emailed out the letter that the Legislative Council received on 5 January, in which the question was again posed to the Higher Learning Commission on what Measure 3 would do relative to accreditation in the state. And I would ask you to read closely the second and third paragraph of that letter, where in effect Higher Learning Commission is saying that we can't speculate on what the accreditation issues will be, because we don't know what it looks like if it passes. And the truth is, neither do we. We know we would go from a board to 3 commissioners. We know that. We know some of the mechanics of it, but it would require enabling legislation by the legislature between November and 1 July when it would take effect. And the Higher Learning Commission, in effect, is saying if it passes in November, then the enabling legislation is passed. Then we will review the enabling legislation and we'll decide if there's an issue about accreditation. That's basically what the last letter says. So I don't know, General Sogsveen, did I miss anything or anything you want to add to that?
You didn't miss anything.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that?
I think part of the issue too, Larry, is it not that, and maybe for Murray too, is that if the measure passes, there's still not a lot of finality to the mechanics until the legislative session that follows. And that's part of the problem is we don't even have a clear picture immediately after the vote. We don't really have a clear picture until the conclusion of the following session.
That's correct.
Mr. Schaaf, that's correct. The measure, the vote is on November 4. The bill submission deadline for the legislature is December 4. But I realize you can introduce legislation after that. So I've discussed the matter with the Legislative Council as to whether they are going to draft legislation in the event it might pass contingency legislation. The answer was no. So we will, I believe it's appropriate that we internally draft implementing legislation just in case it passes. And you really don't know what, how the implementation of that constitutional provision, what it will look like until it gets through the legislature. So I think the Higher Learning Commission is unable to make a decision based on Constitutional Measure 3. They will have to wait until if Constitutional Measure 3 is passed and implementing legislation is passed before they can make a decision.
Chair, Murray, that's a little bit of a delicate dance in proposing legislation because that could give the appearance of support for the measure too. So we have to.
Well, the legislation would only, I mean, I think we have to be thinking about what the legislation would look like just in case it passes, because 1 month between November 4 and December 4 isn't enough time to go through the entire code to determine what needs to be changed to transition from a board to a commission.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions on that, I will move on to the next issue, which is an update on my 6 goals. When you appointed me as your interim chancellor, you asked me to establish 5 goals and to provide quarterly reports. So this is the first quarter since my appointment in November. And instead of 5, I gave you 6, and so I'd like to give you a quick update on those 6 goals. First was the North Dakota University System Communications Plan. I believe we have made great progress in accomplishing our goal to increase trust with our stakeholders as we communicate the board's vision to lead the nation in educational attainment. We kicked off with internal communications through a video message from me to all faculty and staff on November 1st, my first official day as your interim chancellor, followed by an editorial board tour to all major media outlets in the state. And wherever possible, I've also visited with faculty, staff, students, local legislators, and community members on the same trips. I've been on every campus since November 1, and on each visit have made a concerted effort to work with our campuses to schedule meetings with stakeholders that have ranged from small group meetings with representatives of constituents to large open forums where I've answered any and all questions asked. I've met several times with NDSA and various staff and faculty senate members. I send a video message to faculty and staff after every regular board meeting. I meet frequently with the governor and his team, as well as legislators and business and community leaders. I have given presentations to many groups around the state, ranging from the Greater North Dakota Chamber, to the Dickinson Rotary Club, to North Dakota United, the organization that represents 10,000 North Dakota education and public employees, and to a high school class. I've done dozens of television, radio, and newspaper interviews. We have increased communication with the presidents and dean of our institutions, and I believe have created an environment of trust and openness. Our cabinet and senior staff meetings are highly productive. I'm very proud of the leadership team that we have, and I think our communication within the team is effective. I believe we're making good progress in our communication with and to the board. Granted, we've been very careful. Mr. Schaaf pointed that out at our last meeting. We've been very careful considering the open meetings violations in the past, but I think we're getting there. That's one of the reasons you are meeting more frequently, why our agendas are so full, and why we are live webcasting the meetings. We are committed to transparency, and what is communicated at the meeting is truly the essence of the business at hand. It's this wonderful public organization, the State Board of Higher Education and North Dakota University system, along with our campuses, doing its important work in full view of our stakeholders. And speaking of stakeholders, I'd like to show you our new video, which I believe demonstrates how we're changing the conversation about higher education in the state. We are preparing students for careers that will not only secure our state's success and improve our communities, but also in the long run, help make the world a better place. As we work on developing our strategies for the future, I think this video sets the tone and will be a great tool for all of us to use to help our audiences envision the possibilities on the horizon. And if we could have that played, please. My compliments to Linda Donlin and all the members of the Public Affairs Council that put this together. The message of this, of course, is that education is important to our state and for our prosperity to our state. And then the individual branded institutions, of course, are what makes all that happen. So thank you for that. The next topic is pathways, and Dr. Sonia Cowan will be giving you a presentation on the wonderful work of our various task force working the issues of putting together recommendations for changes that you authorized at your last meeting.
Good morning, Chairman, Madam Chairman, and members of the board. It's my pleasure to give you an update, and I'm keeping the idea of it being at the 50,000-foot level, so it's very brief in terms of where we are in the work of 3 task forces assembled on the 19th of December, but they were unable to meet until actually the 6th of January. So we've done a lot of work in that period of time. Our first group to meet was remedial / developmental education via grade 12 of the public K-12 North Dakota schools. It's a very long name, task force after that. And then the admissions index for student success task force. And then we called the faculty who had been on leave during the break, were able to meet with us starting in mid-January. And that's the best practices in remedial/developmental education. We try to have at least 8 people on each of these task forces representing each of the institutional types that you've identified in pathways. We also had a student representation on our remedial education grade 12 task force and our admissions index task force. Those were drawn from our student association for those representatives that serve on the Academic Affairs Council and Student Affairs Council. We have a mix of academic and student affairs officers from each of those institutional types, and we also have faculty. The faculty on the Remedial Education Task Force and the Admissions Index Task Force were identified by the Council for College Faculty, and our last task force, Best Practices in Remedial Education, is very heavily faculty stacked, as well as representation from CCF on it. Collaboration is obviously the word that and the concept that we're using as we approach the task force work. And out of collaboration, we know from what we find in the business world that starts with cooperation, of identifying the problems and the issues that are before us, and then collective action. It's enough to identify the issues, but actually to take action. And to complete that, we need to put in place a complex interdependence for going forward to continue identifying issues and dealing with those. Remedial education has a number of targets, and so the first group we looked at was the first-time full-time college freshmen. We're looking at the career and college readiness approach that's being used by the K-12 schools in North Dakota. And Superintendent Baszler and I had an opportunity to meet in Washington, D.C. with some of the groups that are dealing with remedial education across the U.S. There is a program out of Tennessee that we looked at as a model and then developed with a task force some additions to that model. Those in our Remedial Education Developmental Task Force via grade 12 include our state superintendent, academic officers, our student CCF representative Suzanne Ross, Dr. Ross. We also included the superintendent of the Fargo schools and the dean of education. I'll explain why as I give you a brief on that model. North Dakota Public Schools graduated in the spring of 2013. Out of their 148 high schools, 7,620 high school graduates, and of that number, 3,270 enrolled in our systems institutions as first-time full-time college students this fall. And of that number, 864 had to take one or more remedial college courses in math or English at our institutions. And you'll see the distribution of that number. 341 entered our community colleges, 242 of that number entered our regional colleges, and 122 entered our research institutions. They met the admission standards of those institutions, but still had remedial needs. They may be very talented in other areas. They may have English as a second language, and they're escalating their skills very quickly, but at the time they were assessed upon entrance, then they had to go into those courses. So what can we do to help bridge that gap between leaving high school and entering college? And our approach is to look at the engagement of at least 4 primary partners in this process. The first partner will be K-12. And we're looking at leveraging the senior year, pushing remedial education back to the K-12 so that the remediation takes place before they arrive on our campuses. What we're looking at is moving remediation to the senior year so that we are leveraging that senior year, but also giving opportunities for students who do not have remedial needs to then take an enhanced curricula and prepare also for the workforce at that time. So we are looking at a 3-pronged approach at that grade 12 is if they need remediation, they take the first semester to work in math and English remediation courses that will be assisted in the monitoring of their success by our community college faculty. And I'll get in a little bit more detail. They could also then, if they needed remediation, spend that first semester remediation, and then take, if they are successful in that remediation, take college courses in that second semester of their grade 12 year. so that they started off with remediation, but they have a success at the end of that year of already having college credits on their records, and then also allowing them to have more engagement in the work and career experiences during that 12th grade year. I'm not supposed to get into the weeds, so I'm going to go, excuse me.
Just a quick question. What is the identifier in their senior year as to where they're in need of remediation?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Mr. Schaff. You were the perfect segue to this slide.
Okay. Sorry.
I appreciate that. North Dakota Public Schools is putting in place a program called Smarter Balanced, and it will be in tandem with the Common Core Competencies Proficiency. So it's a different way of approaching learning. Rather than being the sage on stage and being the one with all the knowledge, we're actually approaching competency-based, proficiency-based instruction, where we enable the students to move at their own pace somewhat and ask the questions, and so the teacher becomes the resource person in the room. In doing that, we know that we have to engage the K-12 teachers in learning new teaching strategies so that they are enabled to utilize this instruction to its optimal. And the Smarter Balanced will start testing next spring our juniors in the North Dakota K-12 system. They will also start knowing as early as grade 3 and then at grade 8 and then 11 where if they're on track to be at grade level on it. But by grade 8, they'll know if they are behind in their science and math areas. They'll also know some other skills. They're looking at 4 areas they're looking at in terms of proficiency through Smarter Balanced. They will no longer get grades like A, B, C, and D. They will get scores of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the K-12 system is looking at what those scores mean to them in terms of meeting at grade level and being proficient to graduate, meeting the qualifications for graduation. But by grade 11, in the spring of this coming year, those juniors will have taken that exam, so they'll know before they exit that they have remedial needs that they can now address in grade 12. It'll be voluntary. We don't have required enrollment and remediation in this state, but it'll be voluntary, but it'll behoove them to address it in their 12th grade year if they have that opportunity, rather than to try and do it at the college level where it costs them additional tuition, or it'll be slowing them down in their persistence to degree completion. We're also looking at monitoring the success of those students by our community college faculty and the district staff in the areas of math and English. And let me just segue from a brief overview at this point to tell you, 3 of our 5 campuses currently have a software program called Pearson. It's a model that was used in Tennessee very successfully, where they, within 90 days, went from serving 60 students in grade 12 with remedial math remedial education to 6,000 within 90 days. They could expand that process. They have the community college faculty who offer those programs on our campus now is remedial coursework. Working with the grade 12 teachers. The grade 12 teachers would be the resource people in that grade 12, and working with that software program, but also our community college faculty are making sure those students are on track to then be successfully admitted to our 4-credit courses when they approach our campuses. If they're not assessed as college ready, they would start the remediation. If they were assessed as college ready, then they'd be encouraged to go into dual credit courses for Math 103 and English 110, our introductory courses on our campuses, or advanced placement courses. And we would also give them additional time in career and technical education opportunities to gain more credits in that area. They might go out and job shadow, and they might also have some more career internships. We're trying to segue them into the world of work so they're gaining the knowledge of the need for soft skills development prior to actually exiting high school or exiting college. We know the world of work does not happen discreetly after high school or after college. It happens oftentimes during that entire tenure of education. So I have 2 circles up here. These are 2 of the 4 primary domains. We'd have the grade 12, but this orange circle over here, which is hard to read, but I was trying to cover all the bases when it was presented to our joint board, is that this is where we have our community college faculty serving as partners to grade 12. We're careful not to say mentoring, because oftentimes that means that one has knowledge and the other does not. We're actually partnering in this approach. The community college faculty would also work with our teacher education faculty in our programs across the state in terms of what those new strategies are for teaching. This is one of the areas that differs from Tennessee's model, is we're pulling in teacher education candidates work as well as the world of work. We think all 4 areas of concentration are important for that grade 12 student before they leave high school. That's where the next banner is teacher education. This would be working with the programs in our state to capture the attention of our teacher education candidates in the methodologies courses and perhaps other ways to pull them in so before they graduate and go for certification, they're familiar with the new teaching strategies so they can hit the ground in their new job without having to go through additional work. They can be very engaged in it. And I'll explain a little bit more why we're pulling all this together at once, and then the world of work. Our hope is in this model, which is a little more complexly illustrated here, is that we would have the grade 12 working with our community colleges in terms of monitoring the progress of those students in a computer lab with a computer program that's like almost a digital form of the self-learning packet. They go at their own pace, but their pace is also monitored by the community college faculty. And the teacher education candidates would also be working with those grade 12 teachers. Now this could occur during a summer workshop, which would be assisting or high school teachers could take as part of their professional development and earning credit towards their salary scale. But we think that would be inviting time to bring in the teacher education candidates to assist in the development of that grade 12 classroom. And also bringing in the world of work through the CTE and some of our businesses that offer internships into that one program in the summer, which has all the partners at one place to start asking about how they can contribute to this model's success. Next task force we had is best practices in remedial education. We know that that last model I just showed you will only work for first-time, full-time freshmen from North Dakota's public high schools. So how do we address the remedial needs of our other populations who come to our campuses? We're looking at what are best practices in English and in math instruction. We're looking at best practices for students in the K-12 that could also embellish our first model I showed you, and also adult learners who come, or students who did not come directly from high school, but have gone on to college maybe 2 or 3 years after they left high school or even later. These are the groups that serve on our best practices. You'll see they're heavily weighted towards the faculty and those who are out of student services who work most often with those students coming into our system for college who may or may not have remedial needs. But what we know exists now is the K-12 enhancements. There's a Red River writing program that happens to help with teachers. That could be also helping embellish that summer workshop where we bring in the teachers and have the Red River writing, the knowledge from that program also applied in our summer program. We know that we have on our campuses some very successful programs on not just our community college campuses but across the system, which is tandem remediation, meaning they enroll in the English 110 but also target where their intervention needs to be in the remedial mode, might be in a lab on it. So they're taking credit-bearing course in tandem with taking an intervention with a writing lab or a math lab or tutorial services that help keep that student on target while they're enrolled in the credit-bearing course. There's a new pilot project being offered by, or recommended by UND, which would embed the remediation and credit-bearing course. I used to teach downhill skiing, and one of the things I learned from my own development is if I skied with better skiers, my skills improved. Somehow it took away the fear just to try and keep up with them. Well, they're finding in some of their research that if they embed the students with remedial education with those who are high performing, they want to keep up with their peers. They work harder, and they are actually achieving within that time of that credit-bearing course the skills they needed and would have had to have taken in a separate course prior to enrolling in that credit-bearing course. That's a pilot project they want to start this year on it, and feed us data both English and in math on it. And then we're having the group is now divided into those looking at what's best for English and reading and writing, and those are looking what's our best models for mathematics. This is evolving. This might not all be available to apply in the coming year, but over time we think we can keep layering the best practices into different models for those different target groups. And so what I'm talking about is different approaches for different target groups, and I've just mentioned these are some of our different target groups. Those first-time, full-time college freshmen who are not enrolled in North Dakota public high schools, those who did not progress directly from the high schools into college, including adults, and those who may be very talented, but perhaps English is a second language and they're just coming up to speed with it. Doesn't mean they can't do the other work on it. That's our last of the 3 task forces that I'm working with is the admissions index. We're talking about is there may be a cut score, but what can we do to assist those students, the information we get from K-12 that informs of their potential for success. These are who are serving on our admissions index. You'll see that a lot of it has faculty representation, student affairs, who most often deal with the admissions processes, as well as a student representative on that. We also have a subcommittee that is comprised of a lot of our data experts on the campuses to help mine the data we now have. This is an example of what was proposed in Pathways, where it has the automatic admission. It was the composite ACT, the cumulative high school GPA, and it was looking at a maximum of 15 core credits that would be capped at 15, and then it had North Dakota residency. At this point in time, until we can put the K-12 model in place for remediation, we have no guarantee that being a resident of this state qualifies you as prepared to enter our college without remediation. And so that was one of the concerns when we were looking at it as a task force, was to question that. And we looked what would happen if we took all the other data that we are now mining and will soon be able to mine from K-12 and apply that in our admissions index. So rather than limit it to everything that's on that, what you currently have in Pathways, with the exception of ACT, you may be able to use that later in life. Those really talk about direct from high school into our system. On it, your high school GPA probably is not of that most important indicator if you've been out over 10 years. And so we're looking at also what the smarter balance scores would be if you've taken the remediation in your 12th grade year and succeeded. We think that shows persistence. That's a resilience factor we may want to consider, the fact that you knew you had remedial needs and you took care of it in your 12th grade year. We're looking also the grades for dual credit courses, not just did you take them, but what were your grades in them, what your AP scores and credits, number of CTE courses you took. If you took any more of the core courses, we might be looking at some point in time at service learning or internships. We might also at some point be looking at emotional intelligence, resiliency, persistence scores. We might also looking at evidence of leadership. Were you the leader of a club or a civic program? And there might be other things such as an admissions essay. We're looking at also on that screen are the scores that you had proposed out of Pathways. We're looking at what we can do now to re-examine some of those. We've looked at the core GPA of 13 or more credits so that we don't have a disincentive for students to earn more of the core courses. We understand that there's a concern about balancing that with additional CTE courses, but we think that 12th grade model of pushing remediation to 12th grade and getting that done, and also giving room for them to take additional CTE courses in 12th grade will address that concern. We're looking at the coefficients now. We're mining the current data that we have on students who have not needed remediation but have been successful in our system for 4 years. Looking at their GPA, their ACT scores, we'll be able to mine some of these other data that's coming from K-12. So we're looking at the full portfolio of what K-12 now tells us about the potential of those students without just narrowing it down to ACT and GPA scores. And I'm hopeful I might entertain any questions you would have.
Board members, any questions?
You can see what happens when you turn smart people loose. And the institutions, you have a lot of really smart people out at the institutions that are working very closely with Sonia on these task force and putting all this information together for your review at a later date. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chairman and Mr. Morton, I appreciate that question. Tennessee has been very successful in this. They're now going to be part of a Harvard study in terms of the success that they have now realized in a very short period of time. They had only adopted the model for mathematics. They're now adopting the model for English as well. But in a short period of time of about 2.5 years, they have realized, this is anecdotal at present, that's why the Harvard study is coming on board for more quantitative data. They realized a score increase on the ACT between 2 and 8 points in that short period of time by pushing it down to the grade 12. Delaware and Connecticut are now coming on board to adopt Tennessee's model. I mentioned to I've been on the phone quite a bit with Tennessee, that we wanted to add the teacher education candidate model in there because we don't want to wait for those candidates to get into the 12th grade classroom to learn those new strategies and the world of work, and they said they wish they could have added that as well. And that's something they'll be considering in the future. So I'm hopeful at some point North Dakota is the one that's written up by Harvard.
Has there been a discussion as to who bears the cost of the 12th grade remedial?
Madam Chairman and Mr. Schaaf, yes, in Tennessee it was a $1.5 million grant that was given out of the governor's office to increase it within 90 days from 60 students to 6,000. And they've continued in terms of money coming out of the state legislature for that. They've also sought some additional monies outside of that for grants specific to higher education improvements or reforms. And in the in Delaware, my understanding is they're going also after legislative, but that one's not firm yet. They're just looking at this approach now to adopt it.
One more question. I understand the 12th grade remedial. One thing you indicated is that it's not mandatory. A student could be identified as needing a 12th grade remediation, but it's not mandatory. So is it still your view that since it's not mandatory, will we still have to have the same remedial structure at the college level, and we've just added another remediation structure at the high school level?
Madam Chairman and Mr. Schaaf, we would need to anyway. We're only talking about North Dakota public schools. You accept students from other states. Now, the contiguous states of South Dakota, Montana, Montana, Wyoming have just adopted Smarter Balanced as well. So the assessment of the need will be much earlier in those states than it's been in the past. And they may also look at this 12th grade remedial model. We know that people are starting to talk about it in these states as well. Whether they'll adopt it or not is their call. But we think that we will need remediation because we have these other target groups. We will always have adults coming in, and it may be that they had the skills in the beginning, but it's atrophied. How many of us could do the trigonometry questions we were able to master years ago if we're not staying skilled in those areas? And so we think there will still need some remediation, but we think that number will drop significantly because it's been addressed in our K-12 schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And moving on for my next goal, the next goal was a strategic plan, and I had handed out to you, and I'd just like to walk you through it, a colored sheet that has 5 columns to it. So we're putting together the process by which we will develop the 2014-2019 strategic plan, and what I just want to talk across the bottom of this thing is that there are a number of issues that are playing together and I believe have to inform our strategic plan, and we need to inform those activities as well, and so there's a lot of cross flow of information. So on the left side, you see the 2020 and beyond and the Succeed 2020 are very, very deliberate strategic planning processes that the governor, the Department of Commerce have been involved in. Hess has $25 million invested in this. Ms. Nessett has been part of this initiative. And I am on those committees, and the talk is always about education. And so if we're going to be talking about education, we need to be at the table, and we also need to use that information rather than recreating the wheel. They've gathered a lot of information about what North Dakotans think about education and think about the future. The strategy overall, by the way, is articulated under 3 columns: people, places, and opportunity. And all of these efforts are driving towards fulfilling those. How do we educate our people and give them a good quality of life? How do we have places that people want to live in? And then how do we ensure that everyone has opportunity and education and stuff to participate in the very vibrant economy that we have here in North Dakota? So all of that is informing each other. We're all part of that. Some of you board members are part of that. And I'm a part of that as we go on. The second column is our current strategic plan. We have that in place, and in July you voted to extend that for 1 year, and so I'm looking forward to bringing this new strategic plan to you in July of this year that will contain all of these components. But that old strategic plan has to inform the new effort as well. Then, of course, the pathway to student success, and I've just listed what the task force are doing, and Dr. Cowan just went through all of those. Then the Greater North Dakota Higher Education Partnership has been going on. The Greater North Dakota Chamber has been traveling around the state and talking to business and industry about what they expect from education in the state. And that, all of those discussions, every one of them, I've been to a number of them, your presidents have been to a number of them, they all center around higher education. What are the needs of higher education? What our business and industry needs from higher education? And so it's a two-way street. And so we've had those discussions. And then the last one is the joint boards of education. We have decided we're meeting quarterly with the joint boards. We just had a meeting last week, I think, of the joint boards. And we're now meeting quarterly, and the joint boards, which is made up of they should be all there. The State Board of Career and Technical Education, Education Standards and Practices Board, the State Board of Higher Education, the Department of Public Education. The reality is that the students that walk onto your campuses come from somewhere. They come from our K-12 system or somebody else's K-12 system. And we can't be operating in an environment where we think we're starting with a freshman and it's all brand new. So what we need to be is we need to be partnering very carefully across the spectrum, whether it's career tech education, all the K-12 initiative, in higher education. We need to be operating across that full spectrum so that the student is transitioning from P through 20 and then lifetime learning after that. And of course we have a big part to play in that. So on the strategic planning front, we're looking at all of these initiatives that are going on. All of these initiatives are informing each other. We're involved in all of these initiatives, and all of that will help us inform our strategic plan as we put it together.
And Mr. Chancellor, I'd also like to mention that it is a joint boards, and so I'd like to encourage all board members to attend when they're available. I know that Kathleen joined us, I think, for the first one, but I would like to get 100% participation if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next is the compliance plan, a compliance program. General Sogsveen is leading the effort to develop a full compliance plan that includes the elements of internal controls, internal audit, and the compliance office, all of which are now becoming operational. In this regard, as you know, Tim Carlson is working to create an internal audit office out of whole cloth. I'm very supportive of his work and look forward to the establishment of that full audit plan, which of course will be brought to this board. Kirsten Franzen recently went to a national training program on compliance, and is working closely with General Sogsveen in creating that office, once again out of whole cloth. When these efforts are complete and up and running, I assure you that as a board you will have mechanisms in place to help you manage risk much better than has been a past practice. And the fifth, my fifth goal to brief you on, it's the system-wide master facility plan. You recently received a full update on this effort at a board meeting. We are on target for completion with the original plan and timeline for a draft report by review for review by mid-April and a final report to you by mid-May. The consultant presentations on findings will be available in early June for presentation to other stakeholders, including legislative committees. And finally is the development of the biennial budget. We are on target in all of our budgeting processes. Actions to date include we have broadly distributed the process and timeline documents in January. We've received input and proposals from various NDUS councils, the NDSA, the Chancellor's Cabinet, and from individual meetings I held with each one of your presidents. I will be sending my recommendations to the State Board Budget and Finance Committee in early April. And I expect that you will finalize operating budget requests then in late April. The only outlier now is the capital budget, which we will work on once we have the system-wide master plan in place. Then the capital budget will be finalized by you in June of 2014. And that completes my update on the 6 goals, unless there's any questions for me. Okay, the next issue, we're going to provide you an update concerning the REACT building at UND. UND's Research, Enterprise, and Commercialization Building, called REACT 1, was a joint venture between UND and the UND Research Foundation, born in the years prior to President Kelly's tenure as UND president. As envisioned, it was to provide biosafety level 3 and 3E lab space for private companies who would partner with UND in the advancement and commercialization of university innovations and discoveries. It has never been a financially successful operation. UND has provided lease payments for a portion of the building and subsidized operations through other payments so that the foundation could meet its financial obligations. Under President Kelly's leadership, it was decided that UND should purchase the building and take over management of it from the UND Research Foundation. Last January, you, the board, authorized UND to proceed with such an arrangement by obtaining legislative approval, and then delegated to the Chancellor the approval of that transaction. During the legislative session, however, there were discussions about who should actually participate in those negotiations, and the law specified the State Board of Higher Education. When I assumed this office in late June 2013, I was not aware that this transaction required special handling, a fact I learned on October 4th, 2 weeks after the closing on all financial arrangements. I have come to the conclusion that we should have handled the purchase of the REACT 1 building differently, and I take responsibility for that. I apologize for any confusion or ill will this has caused the board, the legislature, UND, or the university system. The last thing I wanted to do was to create any more controversy for the university system, and I'm very sorry that I did. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Scogan. Yes. Mr. Schaft.
Madam Chair, Chancellor Scogan, my understanding is that the legislature, their committee looking at this is ongoing. Is that correct?
We did meet with the Government Finance Committee, and we explained how we had initially viewed that and gave our side of it. And then I was told that they would meet again in March. And then we recently received the agenda for that upcoming meeting, and what they are asking, and we are now consolidating, is a list of facilities that are on state-owned or other lands that are operated or funded through foundations that have financial obligations for the institutions. So we're compiling that list now.
And the reason I ask, Madam Chair and Chancellor Scogan, is I wasn't at the last meeting, but by following the accounts of the meeting, it's my observation that you have a legislative committee that has arrived at their conclusion prior to the hearings. And if that is the case, and it seems just by the line of questioning some of the information that's being requested. I'm wondering if there isn't some fruit to at least engaging the legislative leadership on the ultimate question of what is the remedy you're seeking. Because that's you know, I understand the process that this went through and certainly your explanation, but it seems as though they're digging and digging and digging, looking for an ultimate remedy, and I'm trying to picture in my head what that remedy would be, and at least as a board member, I'd like to know sooner rather than later, you know, what their thoughts are on that.
We certainly have a Gordian knot here, and I think it's made out of titanium, and thus probably impossible to cut. So I don't know what the solution is either. I know that in bringing this to a close, I felt it was important to acknowledge that we should have handled it differently, but I don't know that that puts anything in reverse. And I have been engaged with the legislators involved in this, to some of them at any rate, and have had conversations with them. And it really is that that these conversations that occurred during the legislative session that I was not aware of seem to, you know, their consternation turns on that, and I get that.
Right. And I agree with your observation. My concern is as we dig into the budget process, et cetera, if there's legislators, particularly some of the leaders who are of the mind, and I'm speaking hypothetically here, that the ultimate remedy for them is this is going to affect a future capital project at UND, which we've visited those issues before on various campuses. It would be nice, at least as a board member, to try to have some idea as to where they're going with this in advance, because it could be a bit of a domino effect. I'd rather not see that remedy just come in a piece of legislation after we've gone through the budget process, pretty much solidified our situation, whether it's capital projects or otherwise. And so again, and I think you understand what I'm asking, I think in this case it's best to be as upfront as we can and just say, you know, where are we ultimately going with this? Because we need to know that for the process we're going through, and I'd rather deal with it now than right at the session.
I agree.
Who would have that answer?
Well, I think you'd get a decent idea out of the committee. I mean, not to say that the legislature can't act on their own later on, but I think you'd get a decent idea out of the committee.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Schaaf. Okay, moving on to, oh, yes, yes, Carrie.
Ask a question. You know, I know sometimes, Grant, you remind us that some of us haven't been here as long, and so I would just ask the question, you know, so the way I read the legislative language, it's that the state board is supposed to negotiate a contract, and I mean, when are we allowed to? I mean, I would assume that we can. Would we have done it any differently, is what I'm saying? I mean, wouldn't we always, I can't imagine that we would all get together and try to negotiate as this body. It seems to me this is something we'd always delegate to the chancellor or someone else, you know, I mean, to manage for us. And so I'm, you know, if you could explain to me, it's not clear to me what we weren't supposed to do here, what we were supposed to do.
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, well,
Sure.
you know, I mean, I know you've.
I don't think we actually have an answer to that. In my view, and at least my sole view, the legislature looks at this as though they visited it during the session as a very special matter, and the language of board involvement to them, jumping inside their minds here a little bit, was that this would undertake a level of scrutiny different than what we typically would, as you described, delegate to the chancellor. I don't think that was necessarily clear to board members either, but I think that's the position that the legislators who are pushing this, that's the position they're taking, is there was a level of scrutiny that should have come to the board versus our normal process. I agree with the chancellor in that we're at loggerheads on this. I mean, as a board and as a system, we can throw ourselves on the sword on this to whatever degree we can, but it seems, at least in my observation of the process, is that they're looking for some resolve. And the issue is that the transaction has been completed. Am I correct?
So the building has closed, the transaction's closed.
That's what I mean. It's been completed. The transaction is completed. And therefore, at least the contractual lawyer in me thinks that it's difficult to unravel that. So where are we? Even if we were, just for argument's sake, to turn to the committee and say, we admit complete fault here. But what do we do? And that's my point, is I'd like to know what they think we should do now rather than...
Well, yeah, and I guess my question was more, how do we avoid this in the future? Or, you know, we're supposed to know that this particular thing is to be treated differently, and even then, I can't imagine, like I said, the 8 of us getting down and trying to negotiate a contract. It seems like something we would always want to delegate to, you know, the chancellor or the president involved. And so I'm just kind of, in the, you know, in the interest of avoiding future problems, I'm trying to figure out what we were supposed to do. And I just, you know, based on your experience, I wondered if you had any insight there. But
Well, nothing other than to say that this was a fairly unique situation. I mean, it was addressed singularly by the legislature and special language in the legislature, and so it's something that probably doesn't have a lot of application to what we do across the board in other matters. My personal view is that, you know, there are other questions that maybe need to be asked, not regarding the REACT building, but the Centers of Excellence process. You know, to a certain degree, we're partners in that process simply because we allow those facilities to be built on our land meaning land owned and controlled by the Board of Higher Education. And we have a limited engagement as far as the activity that takes place there. But one gripe I've always had is that we tend to get hung if things don't go right. And I've never been really comfortable with that. And so that opens up another discussion that I wish maybe the committee would look at, which is a broader discussion as to centers of excellence. But with regard to this, it's kind of a singular issue.
I think it also, there's probably a larger issue when we have organizations or boards that operate outside. They're not under the control of the president of the campus. They have their own board. You have your foundation board. You have the entrepreneurship board at UND, and I'm sure there's so many boards I'm not even aware of. And I just wonder what kind of risk we take on as a board when that is going on across the state.
Well, to some degree, we're finding that out now.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, thank you, everybody. Moving on, item number 5, North Dakota Student Association report. Oh, yes, Dwayne.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dwayne. Can you hear me?
Just as an update on that. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The issue here is, as we've talked about before, is very, very simple. The legislature looks at this as that it's not that legislative intent. And we gave some authority to the chancellor early on, but what happened is when they put the legislation together, they said that the state board was in charge of it, and they have to go before the budget section. And anyone who followed the legislation like this past session knew that. They changed this to say that a committee of the board, approval to this board was what was appropriate. And that's what it looks to me as if that's what they're saying today. They say you didn't have legislative approval. Now, 8 members would not sit down and negotiate this, but as I offered to Larry back in September to help on this, finding out that it was already done, typically we would have, with the negotiation, typically we would have come back to the board for approval and got to the budget section. That's kind of where it's at today. And you know, legislators, no matter what you talk about, when they make up their mind, they make up their mind. And we just need to find what the solution is here to make this not happen again. And secondly, the 6 months on now. That's my only comment, Madam Chair.
Okay, and thank you, Dwayne. But I think that as far as the dates that you mentioned, it would happen when we were out at the, was it the ACCT conference? So we know it was October 4th or something, then we first had these conversations. But thank you for your input. All right, Jennifer Vetter.
All right, Chairwoman Diedrich and members of the State Board of Higher Education, thank you for the opportunity to report to you today regarding the North Dakota Student Association's activities and goals. I have about 2 months left in my term as president, so I'd like to take this opportunity to present to you a full summary of our last meeting and of my goals for the last 2 months of my term. So first, in regards to pathways to student success, last semester I presented a resolution which addressed the ongoing discussion and development of the North Dakota University System's Pathways to Student Success Plan. This legislation expressed NDSA support for the overall concepts in the Pathways Plan while recognizing that there are issues that students would like to see addressed prior to full implementation of increased admission standards in the system. In pursuance with this resolution passed by the General Assembly of NDSA on September 21st, 2013, the State and Legislative Affairs Committee has continually held follow-up discussions at our meetings. This discussion has been an ongoing agenda item for NDSA to enable all institutions' student leaders to talk to their constituents and voice concerns about the Pathways Plan. Following a resolution in January, each campus's student government or other representative body has been encouraged to collaborate with their administrators. The more information that students are presented and allowed to discuss with administrators prior to implementation, the more aware we are that this plan has great potential for benefiting the future students of our university system. I encourage all of you to consider how the success of this plan is to be measured. Is it simply increased graduation rates, or is it higher job placement after graduation? Is it increasing our national rankings through IPEDS or U.S. News and World Report rankings, or is it how highly North Dakota high school students rate NDUS schools in their college search? Today's student leaders recognize that the decisions and policies set today might not impact many of us, but they do impact the future of the schools that have given us our education and many opportunities like the one I have reporting to you today. The second item I'd like to report to you on is the statewide day of service. Our Student Affairs Committee planned a day of service on Martin Luther King Jr. Day back in January. This event will occur for 2 years beginning this spring and will then be reviewed by the Assembly. Projects occurred on more than 7 campuses or in the communities of the member institutions, and more than 380 student volunteers were involved. The projects benefited a variety of nonprofit organizations, and we'll be publishing project details and pictures on our website, which is ndstudents.org. The third item I'd like to report to you about is research projects. Our State and Legislative Affairs Committee has set research priorities for this year. I've told you this before. And because our organization is not busy with the legislative session, we're researching a few topics in higher education to better understand our lobbying for next year. The first is the State Board referendum, which is Measure 3. And we've been utilizing research and the talking points documents from the System Office to inform our report. The NDSA Assembly is likely to discuss taking a stance on the measure and what our following action is likely to be. Regarding open textbooks, after a presentation this last month from Dr. Tanya Spilovoy, the NDUS Distance Ed Director, NDSA is likely to draft a resolution in support of legislative funding for open educational resources and open textbooks to be integrated into curriculum. Regarding merit-based scholarships, we have advocated for an increase in merit-based scholarship funding in the past, and we are likely to do the same for the next legislative session. To my knowledge, this is also the intent of the university system, and we will be happy to collaborate with you in support of this funding. And then the fourth topic is undergraduate research. These reports will be finalized and discussion will begin at our March meeting. I will present our findings and associated research to you at that time. The fourth issue is the Connect ND fee, and I had Christy pass out a resolution to all of you before the meeting began this afternoon. Our State and Legislative Affairs Committee passed this resolution at our February meeting, and it states that the delegation of NDSA grants permission to the appropriate leaders to advocate the following outcomes. An appropriate decrease of the Connect ND fee consistent with what was required to support the bond, or a clear explanation should the fee not be decreased at all or only partially decreased. The delegation of NDSA is open to supporting the continuation of the bond portion of the fee if a very clear need is demonstrated that would be essential to continue to provide essential services for the fee-paying students. Appropriated funds that support the higher education component of Connect ND so the fee can partially be decreased or retired. As ConnectND supports many facets of the operations for the North Dakota University system institutions, it is considered to be proper that the state funds be utilized to cover ConnectND as opposed to student fees. And continued support for involving the leadership of NDSA in discussions relating to the ConnectND fee. The delegation of the North Dakota Student Association greatly appreciates this and is willing to put forth the effort needed to keep this communication open and positive. The fifth item I'd like to report to you about is the student affordability study. Partnering with one of my officers, NDSA has developed a survey regarding student affordability, which I mentioned at the last state board meeting. This survey is being distributed to each campus student government or appropriate organization. The purposes are to determine, 1, if student debt is tied to middle-income families in North Dakota and other states at our institutions, 2, if out-of-state students acquire a higher rate of debt while in college, and 3, what other expenses, such as travel, lifestyle, or housing, cause higher rates of student debt. We plan to complete this study prior to our March meeting. 6, I'll just touch on the goals for the remainder of my term. This past weekend I shared these with the Assembly and thought it'd be appropriate to also share them with you today. First is to complete organizational analysis of officer positions, requirements, and stipends. Second is to lead a seamless leadership transition following elections. And third is to finish all ongoing projects, including our survey on student affordability, our State Legislative Affairs Committee research, our Constitution and bylaw changes, and our budget for 2014-2015. And finally, our upcoming meetings. Our next NDSA meeting is March 28th and 29th at Lake Region State College. We'll be holding our annual elections at this time, including the nominations to the governor for the state board member, and at this point, 3 individuals have been nominated for that position. And our final meeting of the year is April 25th and 26th at Bismarck State. At this meeting, we'll be holding a leadership seminar and approve our 2014-2015 budget. Thank you for your time, and I can now answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions for Jennifer? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
For all that you're doing. Okay, number 6, Council of College Faculties, Dr. Munsky.
This is the last meeting. The Council of College Faculties did have its session on Tuesday, the 11th of February of 2014. There are 7 items I would like to draw to your attention, and I will be very brief. I first would like to thank Dr. Cohen and the interim chancellor, because they've already alluded to what has been going on with the NDUS task force committees, of which there is Council of College Faculty's representation on all 3 committees. The second item is the efforts being spearheaded by Dr. Eric Murphy for the creation of a permanent research fund that would be faculty-driven. The third item is that there is continuing to be interest in how do we deal with the Family and Medical Leave Act as it relates to faculty. The fourth item relates to the efforts by the Council of College Faculties to have a faculty-wide, NDUS-wide faculty conference in the middle of October of 2014, and I would like to thank the interim Vice Chancellor for her efforts to work with Dr. Quijano from Dickinson State as we try to move forward with her in this regard. The fifth item relates to the ongoing concern of faculty with House Concurrent Resolution 3013, and the Council is inviting North Dakota Student Association to work in collaboration with the faculty. But as Ms. Vetter has pointed out to me in an email to Dr. Markell, current president of the Council, and myself, I am open to the idea of collaboration. However, I do believe that our bodies, while they can collaborate, serve very different interests. And perhaps they are. Faculty are the keepers of the curriculum, not students. The sixth item is that there was an election of Council of College Faculty Officers Dr. Quijano will be president next year. Dr. Russ is, I believe, the vice president. Greta Paschke agreed to continue to serve as the secretary. Dr. Eric Murphy will be coming on board as the Council of College Faculty's representative in July. And the other positions take effect a month earlier. And the last and seventh final item is that on the 11th of March, the Council of College Faculties will again have a teleconference, and we are hoping to include stakeholders such as Ms. Vetter and the NDSA, but also we'll be inviting our interim chancellor and the vice chancellor to help us through our various agenda items. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Munsky. Where is Eric Murphy employed? Which institution?
At the finest medical school in the state of North Dakota.
Thank you very much. Okay, Staff Senate report, please.
Thank you, Madam President. We met on Monday, and we were proud to have Chancellor Scogin join us and give us an overview of where things were. Two major points that we're working on is we are still working with the system office on a tuition waiver task force for self-supporting courses. And also the State Staff Senate asked ND PERS that in the future, when they have committees working on items that are directly related to our benefits